My friends, I hope where you're at, the sun is also shining and the grass is also becoming greener and greener as we step further and further into the gift that is the season of spring. And man, I do love spring in Tennessee. I got my official inaugural sunburn on Saturday because it was in the high 70s, which is pretty warm, but I was outside like all day because you just can not be. So I'm a little burnt. It's okay because it's so good. Welcome to the ecoChristian podcast. I'm your host, Caleb Gray Haynes, and yeah, we're still exploring what it means to be Christian on planet Earth because, as it turns out, it's involved. And friends, before we dive into this amazing chat with Reverend Flo Oakes today, I've got to tell you about an opportunity coming up because I just don't want you guys to miss it. So this April 16th is the National Faith and Climate Forum, and it's hosted by Blessed Tomorrow. And y'all, last year I had the amazing chance to be a part of this in Washington, D.C. in person. But this year, it's actually going to be even better because there are satellite locations and online options spread all across America if you're in the States. And so this is a chance to be part of a nationwide movement towards faith-driven environmental stewardship, and to join other people of faith for purposeful discussions, workshops, opportunities for creation care and climate activism. So this event, I know what you're thinking, but this event is really for everyone, right? Whether you've been caring for creation for a long time or you're just getting going. And so I'm actually going to personally be hosting a forum satellite here in Nashville, and would love to have you if you're in the area. But the more people at the table here, the better for this planet healing work. I'm going to put the link in the show notes, but it's just nationalfaithandclimateforum.org. But now, y'all, you've got to meet my friend. Okay, friends, welcome back. I'm really excited for you guys to meet my friend, Reverend Flo Oakes. Flo is the children's pastor here. We're sitting in St. Mary of Bethany, which is a wonderful parish congregation here in Nashville. She is passionate about children's spirituality and creating art and resources that affirm the dignity of children. She is the co-author of a great little book that we have. It's called Little Prayers for Ordinary Days, and a member of the children's band Rain for Roots, which we're definitely going to have to talk about. So I would love to talk about that. And she enjoys planting flowers, rereading Anne of Green Gables again and again because, amen, and dreaming up farm plants with her husband Josh, making up song parodies with her kids, snuggling up to her giant dogs. And Flo, you're currently an MDiv student at Vanderbilt, and you're also recently ordained in the Anglican Church. Is that right? Awesome. So really excited. And then, of course, one of the main reasons I thought it'd be great for everyone to get to know Reverend Flo a little bit more is because of her creation, which is called Wild Wonder, which is a curriculum, a kind of VBS-style curriculum for kids to engage with nature and creation care, which my kids did a couple summers ago, which was the best thing. So we'll definitely get into that. But welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in your space, so
welcome.
Yeah. So good, so good. Yeah, I love your name, and it makes me think about like how they say statistically people who are named Dennis become dentists. You know, like I think like with Flo Oakes, like it's got to be good. You know, like
the botanical.
Yeah, it's all there. Yeah. That's so awesome. What are the roots? Do you know what the roots are?
Well, my first name is Florence, and I was named after both of my parents are Italian, and my mom was born in Italy. So I was named after my grandmother, whose name was Florence.
Wow.
And Oakes is my married last name, and then we wound up having these two kids that we gave botanical middle names to, Sage and Ash, and so we've always been kind of drawn to that.
Yeah. Wow. That's really good.
I didn't realize that with the middle names. That's really cool. Yeah, so maybe we could just meander in here and you could tell us more about your own journey and your sort of, I like to say like your eco-Christian story or your eco journey, but it's just your journey. And when some of those, particularly those dots begin to connect for you, I guess, between your faith and creation. And but feel free to start where you like.
I feel like I really have to start in childhood because that's where that spark ignited for me. I grew up in California, on the central coast of California, in a part of a region that is called the chaparral biome, and it is one of the only chaparral biomes like in the world. Shares a lot of characteristics with the Mediterranean. And looks a lot like the Mediterranean in the summertime. It's like these rolling golden hills with oak trees, olive trees, walnut trees, fruit trees, and then you've got the ocean right next to that and mountains on the other side, so it's just this beautiful spot in California that's very rugged. And it was just a beautiful place to grow up. And I grew up in the country in the middle of just 1,000 acres of oak trees. And so my childhood I was the last of 5 kids, but I was kind of young, a lot younger than the other siblings. So in a lot of ways, I was like an only child, and I would just spend all my summer days were just outside, morning till night, catching lizards and picking wild mustard and climbing the oak trees. And to me, we'd also in my family suffered a lot of grief and loss early on in my childhood. And for me, going outside and being outside, some of the words that I connect now, looking back, were just that those were the places of comfort and peace and feeling even just held like by the tree that I would climb. And years later, being able to connect that and say, oh, those were the places I was experiencing God's love. As a child, nobody said that to me or connected those dots. And so I think that's what now as a, children's spiritual educator, formation person, what I care about so much is that these ideas are happening in children. They just don't really know how to express it, or they might not have language for it. And so helping find that language is so important. But for me, really, those connections to the earth and all of the nature around me started then. And just always, always, always loved being outside. And then probably, I guess, skip ahead some decades, and I started reading Wendell Berry, as like many people do. I feel like he's the gateway.
That's right. That's right.
to so much of this.
Yeah.
And as a literary person and a lover of poetry and writing, and he was just blending like all of the things that I loved, like the sensory part of being outdoors and the outdoor space, and the community part, and the ecological part, like all of that in such beautiful ways. And I really connected to that. And I guess in that same kind of era, I went back to school, and I was probably, 29, 30. My kids were little and started elementary school. So I went back to school myself. I had not gotten a degree, and I really wanted to. And so I went back to school here in Nashville and realized or started noticing like every essay I wrote, they would give you a prompt like it's beginning English classes. And it would be like, okay, here's a persuasive essay. This is a, whatever the essays are. They always have like a prompt. But every one of my essays wound up being about like ecological justice, or a deep dive into Wendell Berry and the landscape, or food justice and food deserts. And I don't know why or where this was just bubbling up, but it was everything. Like every single essay I turned in wound up being this deep dive into into that.
Oh, I love that. It's like that's down there and it bubbles to the surface and you're like, oh, what?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I thought I was just going to school for English, just for writing, but it was always around this theme. And around that time, a friend of mine, Jenna Henderson, who works for Arasha, which is this faith-based Christian environmental conservation organization that is the organization that published Wild Wonder, who I wrote Wild Wonder with and for. Jenna wound up having just this informal meeting about what is Arasha, what is Christian creation care, what are our responsibilities, what do we do with these feelings of despair when we look at the world, like how can we participate in the reconciliation of the world. And the founder of Arasha, Peter Harris, was there. And I just remember thinking, this is it. Like, I didn't know. I kind of always held my experience and my feelings of nature and the natural world and science and justice in one little part of my brain, and then like my spirituality in another part. And that was probably largely because of the Christian subculture I grew up in, would kind of separate those two things, and they felt incompatible in a lot of spaces. And to be able to see that come together was just really exciting. And I remember thinking, this is probably why I write about all this stuff, and I want to do more, and I want to get involved. And that was the beginning of that relationship.
Wow, that's really cool. I do think there's sort of a ceiling there, or maybe some roots there that once you follow through, that you're like, oh, these things are. This is, I think often it feels, or maybe depending on how you grew up, like a forbidden conversation versus one that belong together.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I mean, and it's sort of ironic because that's where we all start back in, in your children's pastor, like as kids, like Genesis 1, but it's the first story we tell. But then we come back as adults and we're like, oh, what? Yeah. That's really cool. And so I love to dig into further of like how your story, like how more got woven around this sort of call to ministry meets particularly kids and children. I think in general, one of the things that I'm going to say we do wrong, I'm just going to throw it out there, in church is, where kids and children get sort of like the ministry leftovers, or at least it's thought of that way. And that kids are not full members, or if you're doing children's ministry, you're not doing real ministry, and all this other just, gosh. So yeah, I'm curious how you got to where you got with that, and how you see, this vocation of children's ministry.
Yeah, sure. So when I was going back to school, I mentioned my kids were little. So much of what is kind of prompted me into children's ministry and creating like resources for kids were just looking at my own kids and wishing they had the materials or the resources or the curriculum, or looking at them and thinking, the things I grew up with are not cutting it. Like,
right.
Like the dualistic thinking of earth and heaven was not healthy for anyone, but for me as a child growing up. And so how could I foster that better in my own kids' lives? So much of, even the started digging here right away, but the band, the Rain for Roots stuff was because there were 4 of us songwriters who wanted something better for our kids than we had grown up with, music-wise. And so that's kind of been the theme throughout. And I think after having done the band stuff for kids for so long, so much of that was deep diving into writing songs that would honor the whole emotional landscape of a child. So, not diminishing their feelings, not giving them these platitude Bible answers, letting them sit and wrestle with things, writing music that would help them know that it's okay to wonder and to question, but that also help them feel held and safe at the same time. And knowing that they're highly capable of absorbing big theological truths. Like, they're actually better sometimes at like distilling that and explaining that to people in a way that as grown-ups, I think we get in our heads too much.
Yeah.
And so the writing of these songs for the kids and playing for kids and experiencing all of that was definitely the gateway for me into children's ministry, because that was a form of children's ministry. And then formally in about 2020, at St. Mary's, our children's director went to grad school, and my priest, who's also a friend of our family, was asking, I know you care a lot about kid stuff. He knew that I had led these camps, the creation care camps. I had written the curriculum. I had done a lot with kids with music. And so he asked me if I would consider the role of children's minister in our church. And at the time, I thought, I had like multiple things going on at once, but one was like, I'm not a minister, I'm not a pastor, I'm not a minister. So like, first, like, let's call my job something else.
Right.
Let's go ahead and I really love curating good resources for kids and like facilitating and being like, this is a great thing for you to be reading or taking in. And so I thought I could just be called the director of children's spiritual formation, because I love to talk about the formation of a child. And I've always felt that passion, and in the music and in the curriculum, about honoring and dignifying the whole child as a person, as a spiritual person who experiences God completely independent of an adult in ways we might not ever know, And so it was very important to me. And I said yes to the job, as long as it was not a pastoral role. And that was in February of 2020.
Okay.
And
wow.
I had never had I'd never worked in that capacity before or worked for a church before. And so everything was brand new. And I was learning a lot, reading my little books that were like how to do children's ministry, and at home, like furiously scanning these books. And the big joke is I had a notepad that said Big Plans 2020. And I was like, we're going to do a children's choir. We're going to do, like the camp. Like I had all the plans. And like 3 weeks later, we were shut down.
Wow.
For COVID. And shut down with like really no idea when we were going to come back. And in that time, there was so much going on, like everywhere. The tornado hit Nashville.
Right.
COVID hit. So much like civil unrest around us. That was around the time of the murder of George Floyd. Like all of these things were happening, and parents were asking like, how do we engage with our kids in this scary world, and how do we talk to them, and how do we honor them but not tell them too much, and all of those things. And so a lot of my emails had gone from just, here's a video of me doing a story time. I would do these stories every week, and to more of a like spiritual and pastoral care for families during this time. And I don't think I even realized that shift. My priest would say, he would read the emails and write back and say things like, that was very pastoral.
Yeah.
And I would kind of cringe.
Yeah. What you talking about? Yeah.
that is not like on my trajectory. And I mean, for so many reasons, one of them being I didn't grow up with women being ordained or in pastoral jobs. So I didn't even consider that as a kid growing up. And I just thought, I thought pastors were kind of like experts in the Bible who told people the answers for their lives and all of these things that were not true. And so over time, that relationship and that role formed really organically between me and the families in our church. And then I guess maybe like summer of 2020, we started meeting outdoors. And so that's when we came back together, and most of the times that we came together with all like the kids and adults and everybody, I was doing godly play stories. This is like a curriculum for kids, a Sunday school curriculum that we use. And I would tell these stories that are very Montessori-like, very slow, very tactile, and there's a lot of wondering that is allowed and encouraged in the story to play with scripture and to really engage with it. And I would tell these stories in person to the whole family, like all of the congregation, whoever could come, meeting outside, because we weren't meeting inside. We weren't having a separate, children's Sunday school. And those stories and that way of like wondering really started to shape our community. And I started to feel that tug of like a pastoral calling, because I was doing and what I was experiencing was not what I thought a pastor did. What I was experiencing and doing, which was just kind of leading, guiding, gently accompanying people through the scripture, felt so natural and fine.
Right.
And it took kind of some outside voices saying, this is a way to be pastoral. And like, this is, like just that it was an option.
Right. Yeah.
Came into view.
Oh, man. There's so much goodness here. I think that, children's ministry like this, in this kind of posture for all of us, has and does become sort of a secret back door or like a secret gateway into the hopefully the reconstruction of healthy ecclesiology and Christianity and churchianity. I'm just going to get real theological here, but because I think that, talking about quote unquote things maybe we've done wrong, it's like trying to give answers to all the questions and trying to have the answers to all the questions. And if you've hung around with kids long enough, you realize that you don't have all the answers, and you can pretend, sure, but is that really helping anybody?
And they can tell when you're pretending.
They can tell, dude. They bust right through those walls. They bust right through them. And really this sort of children ministry, godly play type wondering posture is what we all need. And it's not just what we all need. I think it's how we're created to interact with God and truth, and and talking about God's creation. Right, it should call us into this posture of wondering versus just answering.
For sure.
And I think that's something in the Western world we have to kind of pack away more intentionally to allow ourselves to approach those spaces, if that makes any sense.
No.
I'm kind of getting over in the weeds now, but
completely. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. And I'm trying to catch. You kind of went through it real fast, but as far as like the roots for Rain for Roots, like, so you're saying, so some of that like originated in you and a handful of others.
Yeah.
Saying let's make some songs here.
Yes. Yeah. We all had kids that we wanted. I think we were sitting around my dining room table just talking about the kind of silly Bible songs we grew up with. And they're not all bad, but some are. And some are at least not even bad, but just not good art. Like, even if it's not theologically harmful, it's like not music you're going to listen to in the car as an adult.
Yes. Did you guys ever sing the like Shoot the Artillery song?
And pretty much like every salty song. And so I think the best feedback we ever get back is when we hear people saying, parents saying, we listen to it even after the kids get dropped off at school and leave the minivan, like it's still playing.
Yes, that's right.
I think that's just, we love hearing that, because I think as much as we want to nurture the little hearts, it's music that's for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a reminder, not in like not in like a negative sense, but like in the sense that, I guess in the sense that we're all children, and it's like we are all children, and let's stop pretending like we aren't, Sure, we have more wrinkles, maybe than we used to, et cetera, but and that's how we started, and and that person's still there, and I think we've got to give ourselves permission to have some wild wonder. So so actually, in talking and working to resource and equip, local churches on creation care for a long time now, I'm always like, people are like, we need like a VBS and that sort of thing. And it's always there. And I'm like, well, have you heard of Wild Wonder, and it's not probably, I don't know that you would like want to call it a vacation Bible school.
Right. It is in the style. It's set up similarly. Yeah. Maybe unpack that a little bit for people who are listening of like what that looks like and kind of more where that came from. And et cetera. So when I started engaging with Arasha, my own kids, there was an existing version of this. I think they just called it Nature Care Camp. I can't remember. It wasn't called Wild Wonder yet. But there was a version of it that was developed out in California, actually close to my hometown, with these folks that were out there, which is such a strange connection. But they had developed this beautiful curriculum, but it was very specific to the California geography, climate, the area, the local place, which I love because it's so much of ecological work is all local,
Yes.
But in wanting to make it more accessible more broadly, we needed to adapt it and kind of revamp it. And so that was basically what my job became. And I had started out just as a volunteer at my church using that. They were already using that California curriculum. And the children's pastor at the time at the church we were going to was like, I've got to change these things. And we would talk because I'm from that specific geographical region, and I would say, okay, yes, the reason they're talking about cows is because this is like cattle ranch country,
right? So
we don't need that, but let's like maybe talk about our local watershed, So we kind of started making these adjustments, and right at that time, I wound up finishing up my last 2 years of undergrad, which I did locally at Lipscomb University. And as an older student, I got to do a degree that was called, it was something like, it was a convergence of disciplines. So it was an interdisciplinary, you can pick one, 2 areas of focus and blend them together, and your final senior capstone is like, how do you blend those 2 disciplines? And so I chose writing and sustainability because at Lipscomb, there is an Institute of Sustainability, sustainable practice. And it's like one of the only Christian universities I've ever heard of that has a whole institute dedicated to sustainability. And it was wonderful. It was so great. Awesome. Got to take ornithology classes and got to do all kinds of amazing things that I've not ever dreamed of.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it was great.
It's really cool.
But my senior capstone for that wound up being in conjunction with working with Arasha, developing a curriculum that would work more broadly for people in any place. So, we took some of the little lessons we had, we would make more adaptable. We would talk about, if we talked about birds, we would talk about birds you can find anywhere in the United States, that sort of thing. And so that was where the camp, kind of the revamp started. And then 2015, 2016, we just started, I kind of formally got to work for Arasha, editing and creating and moving through this 4-year curriculum. So it's a 4-year cycle. The order is, all called Wild Wonder, but the year order goes Wonder, Care, Flourish, and Share. So it builds from like kind of this wonder, appreciation, engagement, all the way up to like, how do we care for our place, but how do we care beyond our place and for the people beyond our place and all of those things. And it's practically it can be a 4 to 5 day kind of day camp. There are little 20 to 30 minute stations that rotate just like a VBS would have. And, a lot of people will do Monday soil and water, Tuesday plants, Wednesday insects, Thursday animals, Friday people. So it builds during the week. And for each day, there are all the activities that go along with that. And it's about like a 9 to noon daily camp.
Yeah.
It's all the practical stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that I can think of.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. It was for sure after COVID, I would think, when we brought our kids here that one summer.
Yes.
For it. Gosh, what year is it? Anyway. I wonder in your, getting to sort of like see kids, what that's like, like engaging in this, and maybe what kind of surprised you.
Yeah, it was, I think, over so many years, I think if I were still involved in like editing or writing the curriculum, it would never be done. I think I would always be changing things because when you see how these things flesh out with like real children in the real world, you're just always struck with these new ideas, and seeing how they take an activity and like run with it is so fun and exciting. But we did do a lot of, I did a lot of trial camps and like test days leading up to the publication of the curriculum. So a lot of those little like surprises would be, first of all, what the kids would retain, like the information I would hear back from the parents of, they're coming home and telling me exactly how to extract DNA from a strawberry in that and how amazing it is and how unique it is and how God created this DNA and all of those things. Or everything from that to our child is like turning the lights off in every room now because they're mindful of the energy use. So those things are always surprising to me about them taking it beyond. But I think probably the other biggest surprise for me in the very beginning, and I think it surprises most everyone who engages with the camp, especially like volunteers and leaders who might not have led a camp like this before, is there's a lot of time built in for rest and stillness, some contemplative moments. So even in like a bird watching or a station about the birds, there's a moment of just sitting and listening for birds, and like sitting on a blanket outside and closing your eyes and taking some deep breaths. And there is some silence that for adult volunteers is so uncomfortable.
Yeah, I bet.
They almost always will say, like, when learning about the curriculum or in a workshop, will be like, do the kids really sit still for 5 minutes, of uninterrupted silence?
Yeah.
And the most surprising thing to me and to them is that kids often do. So this is something I think in our overscheduled, hectic world, kids really need and crave and desire. is just time to be still, and especially outside. And so they love it. And that's been probably like the biggest positive surprise that I've seen, is just having that reinforced like every year, is that this is a time that's really meaningful for the kids.
That's great. And I feel like I don't want to keep saying the same thing over and over, but like I feel like we have so much to learn here from our kids. And I think one of the things, that one of the mistakes we make is we expect our kids to behave like we do, or we're kind of watching for that. But like kids naturally, kids naturally wild, and kids naturally wonder better than us. And I really appreciate that, this kind of where you're saying your story began with, as a kid romping around California amidst the Oaks and all of that. We kind of naturally do these kinds of things as kids, and and it's similar. I have a fairly similar story of being outside a lot, like as a kid. And man, I wish all kids had those experiences, because I do think that they build up something in us. But if you didn't have those, like, it's not like you can't still do that. I think that there's just more in the way. And I think today, and I feel like I'm about to sound like the great grandfather, like shaking my finger, because I'm about to talk about like kids and their cell phones, and that sort of thing. But I think I just can't help but wonder if we expect our kids are going to be bored or are bored. Like, I'm just always seeing the parent hand the kid the cell phone, like, as and of course at some point that it transfers and the kid begs for it, and then you're dealing with a whole other thing. But that our kids are kind of, I feel like, naturally pulsed and ready to just be in especially in nature, more than we give them credit for, I think sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think that's a big reason I like really hesitate to say, to use any kind of language like we are teaching kids how to care for creation or teaching kids how to wonder, because we're not teaching them how to wonder. We're just creating an environment and circumstances where it's easier for them to do that.
You're the safari guide.
Yeah, we're the safari guide. And even, one thing I love about, back to the bird station, birds are maybe my favorite, so that's why, is one thing I like to say to the kids is, once you learn like even one bird call, or like the familiar, putting the name of a bird to what it might say, you could be at Target in a parking lot and hear, that blue jay in a tree in the median where there's, or in the, in the parking lot in the one tree kind of calling, and know like, oh, you don't even have to see it, and you hear it, and there's like this connection even in the middle of, urban or suburban sprawl, wherever you are.
That's right.
It's a connector to the earth and to our creator, and to, I think, remind us that we are creations. And
absolutely.
Way.
And I think that's important to say too. I mean, we're both like sitting and doing ministry and raising kids in urban Nashville, and so we're not necessarily talking about like you gotta be out there. But although go stroll in the rolling hills of Kentucky by all means, and see if you can find Wendellberry while you're out there. But I wonder, what advice you might have for parents or other people who work with kids and thinking about implementing ecological care further in sort of the way they're doing life or their posture or ministry and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think to me, it's very similar to just any broader spiritual formation, which my younger parenting self put a lot of pressure on myself, as a lot of parents do, to we need like the perfect devotional guide to read with our kids every day, or we need this book, or we need this time, or the guilt that builds from like, I didn't have a set prayer with my kids every day at the same time. And something that I think the work with Wild Wonder and being outside, being with kids, my own kids really have taught me this, being with kids who like being outside and love birds and all those things, is that it doesn't take a lot of work to just tune in to what is happening around you, and that over time really adds up. It's like cumulative. So I would say with my kids, look at that hawk. Like we would just stop and notice something really small, or when they notice something, like acknowledge that they noticed something. That is the same, to me, that's the same kind of lesson with spiritual care and formation in general, is that it doesn't have to be like a devotional every day set at the same time for 15 minutes. Like it can be one little question or a wondering, or just that you're having these conversations that are open about the connection between your spiritual life and your home and the natural world, that there aren't these distinctions, that you can have those conversations anytime. I think just being ready for those conversations. I once heard a podcast with a children's author. I cannot remember his name. He's a young adult author, but he was talking about how he feels like his foundation of being a writer, how he started, was his dad pointing out the birds to him. And he said it was just this small act of pausing and noticing something like that. And I would say, I don't think he's a religious person, but like that is like a spiritual practice. And so that he was like stopping and noticing this thing became a habit of his. And so much of writing is just noticing things and telling about them. There's this like wonderful little piece of a Mary Oliver poem that says like, stop, pay attention and tell about it. And that has become kind of a mantra for me, especially with camp, is just being able to pause and notice a plant that is beautiful. Notice or something that seems like out of place. Like there's some trash on the ground, like just scoop that up.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be big things.
Right. Yeah. I think you're hitting on something really key there, of drawing down into the particulars.
Yeah.
And you mentioned like the bird call and the Target parking lot, and learning that. And I think when we learn the particulars, and when we learn the colors and the names, and the places that go along with those creatures, and pieces of creation, we love them more.
Yes.
And we connect with them more, and it becomes a part of our story and what we care about in the world. And of course what God cares about in the world, because it's God's after all.
Yeah.
And and so I think that's a beautiful framing to think. And I think that, speaking of technology, I think that's where, we live in a time where it's helpful in that. Like, I've got an app on my phone. When I click this button, it tells me what birds are doing their thing around me right now, which is incredible.
Yeah.
It's like, as soon as like I got my mid-30s, I was like, well, this is the best thing ever, because something happens there that you switch over in your old age into bird blinding and all the things that you rolled your eyes at when you were young, ironically. But
and that makes me think about, I mean, one of my entry into bird watching was through my oldest child, who honestly, and this sounds so terrible, I felt like birds were a little bit boring. I was not that into the birds. Like we would go to the zoo, and they have like the section you can walk inside and see the like bird little area where they fly around, and always be like, oh, let's just skip and go to the more interesting animals, and
get to the tigers. Yeah.
And my daughter started on her own, had this obsession of dinosaurs that went straight to birds, and learned the names on her own of a lot of the birds around us, and would say like, hey, there's a wren, or there's a house sparrow or house finch. I remember one time, this is like a funny story in our family. We like to reference, but I like almost got in a car accident, not really, but like startled because we were driving on a main big road in Nashville, and she shrieked and said, "There's a mockingbird displaying." We looked out, and sure enough, there was a mockingbird with its wings out.
Oh my word!
But her, you know how
Love that.
how it is when your child or someone you care about love a lot, love something, you start investing in that too. And I remember, I better like learn the names of these birds too. And what you described is exactly what happened. Like the more I learned the names of the birds in our place, the more I started to care. Yeah. And it's like you notice, it's almost like when you learn a second or third language. I don't speak any second or third language fluently, but it's like when you hear it in the wild, it's like, oh, you kind of can't stop listening. Yeah. It's like that with the birds or plant names or whatever it is I feel like naming it really does form a connection.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's a perfect example of like, this is not like any, like you don't have to have a degree in anything to do this with your family or anyone around you. And I think it's beautiful, to consider, in a time when, and I rant about it enough of like that, even our education system for our kids, like, they're learning long division, but like they don't learn what soil is, and like the stuff that all life is dependent upon, they don't really necessarily are learning, and some are doing more, some are doing less, but I think it's just a beautiful idea that that the church can be a place where kids are actually gaining beautiful ecological knowledge because this is the Lord's, and it is good, and I think that's kind of a beautiful thought, I think, to consider what we're doing with our kids and what we're doing with our whole congregation, hopefully, and all that. So, well, I'm preaching, but thanks for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we?
Oh, wow. I think one of the beauties of being a Christian in creation care is having modeled for us through Jesus and the incarnation and his life on earth is that care that God and Jesus have for the material and for bodies and for actual stuff that the earth is made of. I think that sometimes in environmental work, we can go to this, without that grounding, sometimes I think we can go either to despair because there's like no hope of anything, or to like, let's make this utopia. And oftentimes that utopia like doesn't include people. It's like, how do we care for the earth as its own thing? Yes. But I think realizing the connectedness of all of it and how caring for the soil is caring for the marginalized people of the world because that's who it impacts the most. And I think all of that coming under this kind of under the umbrella of Christ's work, not just coming to live on the earth, and not just because like he had to come down here and put on the person suit, that's how I've been when I was kind of a child, raised with that imagery of, he just had to come do that for us. But shifting that mindset to thinking about how the earth and humanity is something Christ loved and desired, like the desire for humanity and the desire to be among humanity was so great. And how that really propels and compels me in the work, and that it all matters, and that we can be active participants in the reconciliation of all things in that work that Christ started.
Oh man, I'm gonna drop this podcast microphone on the floor here. That was so good. Yeah. Oh, what a great note to end on. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Friends, check out all this goodness in the show notes from Reverend Oakes. And again, I'll have the link for the National Faith and Climate Forum. And today, may the child within you meet the God of wild and wonder. And, on that note, this weekend we celebrated the Feast of St. Patrick. And aside from celebrating with some Lucky Charm Rice Krispie treat situation that we made, St. Patrick is well known for catching glimpses of the divine within parts of creation. So to end this episode, I've invited a special guest here to wrap up our time together with a prayer that's attributed to St. Patrick.
Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ where I lie, Christ where I sit, Christ where I rise, Christ in my heart, of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in my mouth, of everyone who speaks to me, Christ in every eye that sees me, Christ in every ear that hears me. Salvation is of the Lord. Salvation is of the Christ. May your salvation, Lord, be ever with us.